Welcome to the Brandwise podcast, where we talk about the big branding moves that business owners are making and the why behind it. I'm your host, Jess Freeman, here to help you be wise and be bold. In today's episode, we are getting a peek behind the scenes of Flodesk Rebrand from 2023 with Rebecca Shostak. And Rebecca is an international award-winning designer, entrepreneur, and the co-founder and chief design officer at Flodesk, which is an email marketing platform that works with small businesses. If you aren't familiar, you should definitely check them out. And while most episodes of Brandwise focus on sharing the stories of small business owners who have rebranded, I'm also planning on bringing on some CEOs and CMOs of larger companies to share a different perspective as well. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. So here is my conversation with Rebecca. Hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for being here on the Brandwise podcast. I'm really excited to talk all about Flodesk and your rebrand today. So I wanted to start with, I read your post from a few years ago about the Flodesk rebrand and how it was really about getting back into who Flodesk started as. What made you really decide we need to rebrand, like we need to shift some things?
That is such a great question. And I think when a business decides to rebrand, it's a really serious, deep decision because it has a lot of implications around recognizability, even like search results if you change the name or adjust some of the parameters of your brand. And there's some risks involved. So I think it's really important that you do so with a lot of intent. And for us, I think the company grew so fast when we first started. We launched in 2019 and we were thinking that maybe we would get 500 users and we would be really excited about that. But within about 2 weeks of launching, we had already reached a goal that we had set for ourselves about 6 months to 1 year out. So we launched with a brand that Martha and I just created. I was sitting on the floor of her San Francisco apartment, just sketching, and we came up with a first iteration of it. And then we decided to iterate the brand, and we worked with an agency on that, but it wasn't a full, deep rebranding. It was more like, hey, our current brand is just, we've outgrown it so quickly, and we need something that will bring more consistency to our presence. But again, it wasn't like this really deep, soul-searching look at like our core values and then trying to bring those out visually. So that brand also was really exciting and it served us for a while. But by the time we decided we needed a deep rebrand, there were several pieces that we were trying to solve. So one of the first ones actually was the fact that the brand that we were working with, which was sort of the second iteration after we launched, didn't have a ton of consistency. So we were putting out Instagram posts, social posts, emails and different designs that looked really cool, but they had tons of different fonts in them, different styles. It was very dynamic and very creative, but there was no consistency to it. So there wasn't like a recognizability to it. And the second piece of that is, as you know, I'm sure, like brands tend to evolve over time and they almost develop a life of their own. And if you don't safeguard them and set rules for consistency around them or have clear guidelines from the get-go, brands can sort of run away from you. So I felt a little bit like that's where our brand was going, in the sense that it wasn't like this consistent experience anymore. It was sort of whatever met the moment we would come up with a design for. And when you put all those assets together, say in an Instagram feed or emails or our website, you didn't have this like cohesive sense that like, I see that and that's Flodesk. So that was the first piece we wanted to solve. And then the second piece was just that brand, that sort of runaway brand wasn't truly aligned with our core values. And I think the more time that went on, the more it kind of like, it snowballed into something that was really exciting again and visually beautiful, but it wasn't consistent. And it didn't have any roots. It didn't have any ties to who we really are or what our founding principles were. And then the third, most pragmatic reason I would say is because we didn't have consistency in the guidelines. Our internal teams, as they scaled, weren't able to scale the brand. So it felt like every time we went to create a creative asset, we had to start from scratch. And when we were a really tiny team, that's fine. It's fun. We're creative and we're just playing around and putting out what feels right and what feels exciting in the moment. But once you get to larger teams, that becomes really hard to scale. So I think we were trying to solve these three problems at the same time with the rebrand, and that was my case to my co-founder and the executive team when we decided that we were going to go for it.
I love it. And I really wanted to point out that you started with that like sketch sitting on the living room floor and you're like, this is going to be our brand. I think that feels so relatable. I think a lot of us as small business owners think, oh, like I have to wait to have this big professional brand. And you even creating this big brand of Flodesk, you were like, we're just going to start with this. Like, I'm not going to wait for this perfect brand because, like, as you mentioned, it's always evolving. And then you also mentioned like sometimes the brand gets away from us. And I think that's also very relatable because I know, especially small business owners, it's very easy to get caught up in like the trends and the new fonts and like all that stuff. And then it starts to take on a life of its own or completely like lacks consistency and really affects all that brand perception. So I love that you just like brought that up because even as a big of a brand as Flodesk, like still had those struggles. So it's like, it's not just us. It's not
It's so funny that you say that because in some ways I still see us as small compared to what will become. So I'll take the compliment. I
yes.
appreciate that.
yes. Yes. I don't see Flodesk as small. So I think what you guys have is amazing. So I just love like hearing that part because it's so relatable. So I know you had mentioned also that part of the rebrand was really being rooted, leaning into your values. So I wonder if you can talk about how during the rebrand process, how you made sure that this rebrand would still resonate with existing customers or new customers, or were you like, I'm okay if we lose some people because we want to like be true to our values and really like be rooted in that?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think a lot of brands do sort of have to choose when they rebrand between their vision for where they're going versus what their customers expect from them. And I think one of the pieces that we took a lot of care with is to make sure that we didn't give our members whiplash when we rolled out the new brand. In fact, I would say, and I wrote this in the posts about the whole process, that the current brand as it stands today, I think is closer to the original vision than anything we'd put out in the meantime. And I think to me, it felt like a homecoming, and it was like we hired one of the best firms in the world for the rebrand, and we worked like I went to we can get into it later, but I went to Geneva and worked with one of the most famous Swiss typographers in the world to develop this font for us. But the point of it wasn't to create something new, it was to create a more perfect version of the original vision. And so my hope and my goal when we rolled out the new brand was to bring a feeling of familiarity, and like almost like, oh, like Flodesk is back. Like that's what it was all along, and we sort of missed it. But with this new sense of rigor about the typography and the brand elements, as well as some consistency and motion. So and I think we succeeded in that because when we rolled it out, we didn't get any blowback at all. We got a lot of people who were excited about it, and we got some press from design magazines, which was really fun, honestly, to be recognized in the international scene for the work. But there wasn't this sense of like, oh no, like the brand is not what I loved. And it's like, I think all of us have that feeling like, oh, we loved the band before they got famous. And I think that's what you risk when you rebrand. It's like, oh, they were this scrappy little thing that had something very raw and rough, and we fell in love with that authenticity. And now they've sold out and they've gotten corporate with this crazy rebrand, and it doesn't feel like them anymore. And I think we did a good job of navigating that. Like we didn't have that sentiment when we rolled it out. So I think there was that piece of it. And then we also made a strategic decision when we rolled the brand out that we weren't going to make a huge deal out of it. Like we did announce it, but it was more like a hey, heads up, so that we felt like we wanted the community to feel like they were involved in this rebrand, and they were just as much a part of it as the designers that we hired or our design team internally. And I think the way we positioned that and the way we didn't make this huge deal about it helped as well. Because I think a mistake that brands make sometimes when rolling out rebrands is that it makes them, it's all about them. It's like our brand, we're the hero, like we're the biggest part of this story, like the protagonist. And in our rebrand, we wanted to make our members the hero. And that would, yeah. And so I think that worked, right? It was like a little bit of a different strategy, but I think we did a good job of that.
Yes, I love it. And I love that you said you didn't want to give them whiplash, because I have definitely seen other companies out there that they rebrand and you're like, the new color is throwing me off. Like, 'cause it's, like my browser tab, I'm like, I'm used to seeing this color and now it's this color, or, like whatever. And you're like, what is happening? And they don't get taken along for that journey, like you said, and like they don't feel as part of it. So I think it's really important that you went with that strategy. I would like to talk about the design a little bit and how you decided on who to work with. Because of course, I know personally there are a million and one designers out there and design firms. And so curious how you landed on like going to Geneva and like choosing this firm, and like, can you kind of explain that thought process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was almost more of a gut personal choice, which isn't always the case because we went with Dia, and it's spelled DIA, design studio. And they started out as a New York firm and then they moved to Europe. And they're most famous actually for Squarespace's rebrand, that I believe happened in 2018. And I've always been a fan of their work, but the founder, it was a friend of mine. So I had actually known him for about 12 years. I had met him through a mutual friend a long time ago, and he and I had always had really great design discussions. We were both sort of in the same design circles and had peer connections as well. So we used to have lots of really invigorating conversations about design and brand years ago, long before Flodesk was conceived, long before Dia was the Dia that it is today. So they'd always been in the back of my mind, but simply because I'd had a personal connection with the founder. And then back, I think the year before the rebrand, I attended the OFFF conference in Barcelona, which is a really cool design conference in Europe. And he happened to be there. And so I just reached out and was like, hey, it's been so long. Like, I would love to reconnect. And I didn't really have an agenda about a rebrand. I just wanted to have a chat with him. And we ended up sitting down, we had a cup of coffee and talking. And the more we talked, the more we realized how aligned our design philosophies have been. And I shared about Flodesk and he seemed really interested. And so the conversation kicked off organically. And for me, that was so important because I think when you do a rebrand, there's a difference, truly a difference between a rebrand and a reskinning. And I think a lot of what you were talking about with the whiplash is companies going in and being like, we need a shiny new look. We need some consistency. We want to come out and do something fresh and new because design trends are evolving or whatever the internal reasons are, which is great. But then the firm comes in and they don't have a lot of context about the business. And they do something that's really cool. And like, we call it like designer porn because it's something that excites the design community and all of the magazines and publications that show off new rebrandings. And it's almost like the rebrandings are just as much, if more, not more, about that piece, about the PR and the publicity and like the design for the designers versus actually serving the communities that the businesses serve. And I really felt like my personal connection with Mitch from Dia and also just seeing what they did for Squarespace made the decision a no-brainer. But I know that, for listeners listening who are thinking about how to select a branding firm, it's a little bit of a unique case because I had a personal connection. But I think that that's like the point, right? Because even if you don't have a firm that you know personally, finding one that really cares to get to know your core values and is more interested in like the feelings and the ideas behind the brand and your philosophical pillars, and realizing that the philosophical pillars are like truly what makes a great brand, not the visual identity. The visual identity is a way of expressing what's inside. And feeling like you're comfortable enough with that firm to go through a really deep dive process of like self introspection on your business and reflection. And then having, and choosing a firm that has the visual skills to bring that out in all of the creative assets, I think is critical.
Yeah. And I mean, I have always said that like you need to connect with your designer because you have to, like, it's a process and you have to be able to communicate and trust that person. And sometimes it's like, I've even recognized when like I'm talking with potential clients, I'm like, we're not connecting. Like I'm probably not the best fit for this project. So I think that connection and finding the right fit is so important, because there are so many designers that can probably get you the visuals that you want, but that connection is just going to make the process easier for everyone. So I love that. I love that if there was a personal connection, and also that it kind of like started before you were even like actually thinking about the rebrand. So that's really cool that you had that connection. I would love to also hear about what were some of the challenges that kind of came up during the rebrand process, because I'm assuming it probably wasn't just like perfect and smooth sailing and like everyone was just like, woohoo.
Absolutely not.
uh,
So I think there are a few, but this one moment comes to mind where we had the project phased out, and it was about it was supposed to be a 6-month project, and it turned into almost a year-long project. And I also think that that's something to keep in mind when you're rebranding, is that there may be a lot more back and forth than you anticipate. So pad the timeline. But we had a phase where Dia went and did a lot of explorations based on a discovery period where we talked about our core philosophies and values and what we wanted. And the explorations were very sketchy in the sense that they were rough, they were high level, they were conceptual sketches, they were very, very high level direction, which is something that a designer or someone with a creative vision would be able to interpret and be like, okay, I see how through many iterations this could be refined and polished and turned into something amazing. And they had a lot of sketches like this as part of their process, and one of the reasons I think they're so great. But I remember I wanted to bring the whole executive team on board and share with Martha, my co-founder, and also the leadership team, like where we were at in the process, because it was a really big deal for the company. It was also very expensive. So I didn't want to have that. I wouldn't involve them in the process, right? And I didn't want to have that horrible whiplash moment that creatives experience sometimes, where you get so far in a project without giving visibility to outside stakeholders. And then you get almost to the end, and then people are like, whoa, record scratch, we need to go and revisit this. So I was trying to make sure everyone was brought along. And I presented where we were at with the project, and they saw all these high level sketches that some of them were like pretty out there, and they were really rough. And I of course I don't expect like executives to be able to make like the creative leap from the sketches to a final polished product, but I was actually like shocked at the reception, because people were like, whoa, WTF, Rebecca, like this is so far from what we were thinking you were going to be delivering, and like we're concerned, and this is not what we had in mind when you were saying we wanted to rebrand. And some of there were some really wacky explorations, but that's the point, is like you go wide and then you refine. So I think there were some speed bumps there, and like having that moment where I was getting feedback from the team, like this seems like very out of line. Like, why are we doing this? This doesn't feel right. And having to, and then like working with Dia Studio to like take those and then polish them into something that everybody absolutely loved at the end. And I think that it sparked a lot of difficult conversations, and it was great in the end, because people are able to give feedback early in the process, and I was able to take it to Dia, and we were able to work with it. That was sort of a learning I had, that sometimes like it's really good to bring in stakeholders as soon as possible, but sometimes like it's a little bit too soon. So I'd say that was one of them. And then another piece that wasn't, I would say, a huge challenge, but it was interesting and a little bit difficult, is like when we actually had a custom font created. It's called Flodesk Sans. I'm obsessed with it. It was created by François Rappo, who also did the Squarespace font. And he's one of the most famous Swiss typographers still living from like the mid-century era. And he's also a professor in Switzerland, like incredible guy. And he brought a lot of sketches of the typography. Like he sketches them by hand, and he works with Optimo Studio, which is a Swiss type foundry. He actually works there. But he works with the designers there to like polish it and turn it into something digital. And we were getting all of these sketches from the font and the typeface, and like I thought I was a type nut, but they were so there wasn't like a huge amount of differentiation between them, and so team was like asking for feedback on like, how do you like the curve on the 7? And like, what do you think of the C? Is it circular enough? And I was like, this is a little bit even beyond my my pay grade and being able to give feedback. So I think educating myself more on actual like typographic development processes, which is it's like a whole world in itself, and learning more about that so that I could give better feedback to the team so that we could get the font where we wanted it to be in the end was like a personal challenge for me and like a professional development opportunity.
And you weren't expecting that when you started the rebrand. You were like, I didn't think I was going to have to research
No,
typography.
I mean, it was incredible. It was incredible to see, but we're getting these like sketches on vellum paper, right? They're like translucent and they've got like pencils and like eraser marks on them. And they're like, well, what do you think of these curves and everything? And I'm like, wow, I need to educate myself on this.
I love that. Yeah, I'm also a type nerd, but I'm like, I don't think I'm that much of a type nerd. That's funny. I wanted to also talk about, this is a little away from the actual design process, but something that also kind of goes along with the challenges is, I know when a lot of businesses or companies rebrand, they sometimes make a shift in like their services, their platform. And I'm curious from Flodesk perspective, like with your brand, how do you make the decisions about like adding new features, keeping up with like what customers are asking for, but then also staying true to like, this is what is with in alignment with our brand of like what our goals are?
With the rebrand, we didn't want to make a huge deal of it, like I said, when we went out with it, because we knew that the brand was more for us as Flodesk. And obviously the brand is important and it affects customer perception. And I think people are excited sometimes when they like a new rebranding, they're excited to feel like they're a part of something really fresh and cool. But I also think we were highly cognizant of the fact that you can get blowback for investing in rebrands. And obviously we have an incredibly vocal community. They're amazing. They're always telling us exactly what they wish we were adding, and like I had lots of feedback for which features they want the most and how we can best serve them. And for me it was an and, not an or. So we did have, but and I think that's why part of the reason why we decided to hire a firm like Dia that's so experienced, so that we could allow them to lead the project and not take up a huge amount of internal resources, so that we could continue focusing on adding the features at the same time. And then our philosophy for the rebrand is like, the rebrand's the rebrand, and we didn't want to as we say, like risk the rollout of the rebrand by trying to stack new features in together with it. I think when you during the software development process, especially as you get a more mature company, you try and separate out releases or changes as much as possible, so that you don't get this like huge, like you have this long waiting period where people don't hear from you, and then you all of a sudden like bulk release something. I mean, sometimes you have to, but in general, you bulk release something that could have a lot of bugs or cause issues. It's a lot safer to release one thing at a time. So we took the same philosophy with the brand that we did with our product development.
Nice. And then, so like it's been a few years since the rebrand. How did you measure like the success of the rebrand? Like, I know it was very internal, but I'm curious if you had any like specific details you were paying attention to, or if you were like, we rebranded, it's like this was for us and internal, and like it was a success.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I would say we do feel like it was a big success, and for two reasons I can point out in particular. The first one was more measurable, and we said, this was the pitch that I made to finance. I was like, if we invest in a brand with systems and templates, it's going to make my team much more efficient. I'm not going to have to hire as many people to do the same jobs, and we're going to be able to do our work faster. And this is actually going to save us time and money in the long run. And that was right. We have, and we've been able to keep the team leaner. We are able to get our creative assets out much faster. And we have the added benefit of everything we're putting out looking more consistent. So when people see something, they're like, oh, that's Flodesk. So I would say, like, in a most measurable way, it was a success internally. And then the other piece of it, which is, but I didn't mention, but Dia Studio is most well known for their ability to bring motion to brands. So when they give you a brand, they're not just giving you like a PDF with your colors and your fonts. They're also giving you Adobe After Effects files that allow you to create like special transitions between shapes and typography and like motion for your typography. And we got like a huge library of motion templates. And now I feel like our brand is starting to have motion. So if you look at our Instagram feed before the rebrand, everything was static. And now post rebrand, we have so much motion and dynamism and animations announcing our features. And you didn't see that before. And that not only performs better from a numeric standpoint, but it's also like more engaging as well and makes the brand feel more alive.
That is really, I've never actually heard of, I mean, not that I work with branding firms, but I've never actually heard of like giving the After Effects files. But I love that they incorporate that because it does make your brand more dynamic. And so, like you said, more engaging. So I love that they added that because with everything that happens on social media, I feel like things are what's working is always changing and you always have to like focus on being more engaging. And I love that like you have that as part of the brand. So that's really cool. To wrap up, what advice would you give to other brands or software companies that are considering a rebrand?
Ooh, okay. That's a juicy one. Let me think on that for a minute. So, the first one I think I'd ask is like, ask yourself why you truly need a rebrand, right? Because there's a lot of different reasons. And I think we live in this environment, it's so postmodern, right? Where we're bombarded with media everywhere. And we're also bombarded with like a lot of nostalgia for different design styles from the past. So everything that I see is sort of like a collage of like favorite fonts from the 90s or mid-century modern styles from the 50s and 60s, or even like throwback to Art Deco or Art Nouveau, right? And we live in this era where we almost live in all eras at the same time now, especially when it comes to design. And so it's so easy to have a roving eye and be like, oh, I love that pink or I love that style. So I want to rebrand because I feel like this cool new look is going to be the it thing for Gen Z or something. Or like we have like the brat green or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And you get excited about a certain aesthetic and want to go chase it. And I think while I wouldn't say that's necessarily like a bad reason to rebrand, I would say I would I would advise companies to be and businesses to be a little bit more strategic about the why of the rebrand. Like, for example, you feel like you're missing a consistency, your brand isn't recognizable, your brand is outdated, and you want to bring something modern into it or something fresh. Or you feel like the current visual identity that you have isn't in line with your core values and it doesn't help you express the things in your business that your customers love. Or maybe you have new products or you're starting, like, for example, a photographer could be transitioning from a wedding photographer to a brand portrait photographer. That would be a great reason for a rebrand because the wedding photography aesthetic is so different from, like, say, brand headshots for social media and influencers. So I would say coming in with clarity on the reasoning for your brand and then making sure that that drives every decision you make is really important. Once you have that clarity and you know exactly what you want and where you're going, or even if you don't, right? Like even if you only have the clarity of why you want to rebrand, but you don't have any design experience, which is totally fine. You can bring that to the partner that you choose for your branding agency to help you bring out or express or address like these issues that you've identified in your business and your current brand. But I think it comes back to just being super self-aware and knowing like who your brand is and why your customers love you so much. And then making sure that your visual identity is consistent with what you know about your business and how your customers feel about you. And if it isn't, then that's like a great reason for a rebrand. The other thing too is like, I know this is a little bit, it seems a little bit on the nose, but like choose an amazing firm, right? Like there's so many great designers out there to work with. And if you don't know where to start, like get recommendations, do a ton of research, understand like the processes of the firms that you find too. Like I think that I've seen a lot of branding firms who have like incredible portfolios, but then on certain projects, they're sort of hit or miss. So you want to make sure that you work with a company that hits every time, or at least has a process that makes the most sense. Or maybe they specialize in a certain aesthetic or a certain type of brand, and you want that expertise specifically for your business. So I think there's yeah, I think I got rambly here because I'm very passionate about this topic,
No, that's
but
great.
but there's a lot of things to consider. So starting out with clarity, finding the right partner who has and just like finding top talent, like find someone with excellent work. If you're going to spend the
Hmm.
money, it is expensive. It is worth the money and the investment if you come in with the right reasons for the brand. So like find the very best that can help you. And then
Hmm.
during the process too, this maybe is my last piece of advice, like expect it to get messy in the middle. I've noticed this with some of the best projects that I worked on is you start out with really clear briefs, you have this vision for what you want and everyone's on the same page. And then you get to this part where there's explorations and the firms are like the creatives start sending you work and it's not all there maybe, or it feels really messy, or it's not quite what you envisioned. And then embrace that, like the uncomfortable conversations and giving feedback and pushing back and being like, hey, like let's have a conversation about this, instead of just taking what they give you and feeling like, well, that I'm paying them, so I just have to go with what they gave me. Like really engage in that messy process. And then if their work is really good, like trust that the mess is going to clarify into something really incredible at the end.
This was amazing advice because I've had several people, when they share their advice on these episodes, they're like, make sure you know why you're rebranding. Like, are you just chasing another shiny object, or is it really serving a bigger purpose?
Oh, it's
But then
so
also, is it,
true. So true.
yeah, yes. And then what you said about like leaning into the mess, because as a designer, like there are some of those projects where the first, like ideas that we're exploring or anything, sometimes clients will be like, oh, not what I was thinking exactly. And sometimes I can tell that they're like, oh no, did I make a huge mistake? And I'm like, it's part of the process. Like, it's like painting, like choosing paint colors for your house. Sometimes you have to like paint 7 different swatches to find the right one. Like
Absolutely.
it's part of the process. Like, don't freak out. You're good. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because it can sometimes be messy. But thank you so much for sharing your insights and giving us some behind the scenes look. I would love for you to share like where we can connect with you or Flodesk.
Absolutely. As far as connecting with Flodesk, you can go to our website, flodesk.com, and start a free 30-day trial and see for yourself if it's something that excites you. Obviously, we're very passionate about branding, and that's why we built the company in the first place, is to allow small businesses to express their brands through email and make their emails look beautiful. And then another place that's really great is our Facebook community. We've got a lot of engaged, excited members there. And they can, and especially if you're looking for help or advice on email marketing, our community is so incredible at sharing their insights into email. So yeah, those would be my places.
Awesome. I will link to those in the show notes, but thank you again for being here. If today's branding story inspired you and you're ready to start your own rebrand adventure, head over to justcreatives.com/rebrand to explore how we can work together on your brand. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to leave a review or share it on Instagram, and tune in next week for another episode.